the argument was, well, they're doing that to look friendly, but the rest of the government stood down as well. And then I guess the country goes into a permanent destabilization where they can play the literal right and left off, the two different sides of the country, the right from the West and the Russian from the East, and then just use that as a tool of political control. I know Russia, to a certain extent, collaborates with the EU, but is against the Anglo-American, British, U.S. power bloc. Explain the strategy there.
Well, the strategy is, remember, that Russia has always intended to strike the West. They want to run their own new world order with them in control. We've got a temporary pact with China to join with them to control the world, and they'll have to fight it out, whatever. And they haven't gone that far down the road. But the goal is to take down the hegemony of the West. And but they're not ready to do that yet. So what I'm saying is it's very important to understand that in the status quo that was going on before, last Friday and before, was that the pro-Western Western Ukrainians were the beleaguered ones, and Russia was the bad guys. That's all the news kept saying. Russia has ironclad control of Ukraine, and the Westerners want to be free. The Russians are the bad guys. Now it's been reversed. And this is why this really plays to Russia's favor. Because if they want to postpone the eventual taking back of the Soviet states, whether it's Czechoslovakia, Poland, Ukraine, Georgia, etc., instead of playing like they're independent, if they want to take them back with force someday, they got to wait till they're militarily ready to take on the West, and they're not. So we've got several years that they've got to bide their time. So, but in order to do that, you've got to play the same game that Hitler played by attacking his own people, the Germans, in Poland and in Czechoslovakia, in order to justify that intrusion. It's too early for that justification. Everybody keeps thinking Russia's going to attack Ukraine right now to take it back, and it's too early. It's going to make Russia look very, very bad. They want more disarmament with the West. The West wants more unilateral disarmament with Russia to make sure that they pave the way for this war. And so what they've got to do is slow the process down. Now what happened after Saturday's phony coup, now the Eastern Russians are the beleaguered people. And it's the Western Ukraine that's going to be the bad guys. That's why they had to have all of the pro-Russian majority in the Rada, in the parliament, resign, so that now it can be a majority of pro-Western people. They can get the blame for everything. Plus the fact this allows the West to come to the rescue of Ukraine's bankruptcy. I mean, Ukraine is literally bankruptcy. They instituted currency controls today. The West, just like in the former Soviet Union, they're going to take over all of the payments and give bailout money to them. Russians are loving this. But the most important thing to remember now is that for now on in advance, the Russian, the Western, the phony opposition, these are run by Russians, but they're going to be claiming to be pro-EU. They're going to get the blame for everything that happens now. You're not going to see Eastern Ukraine and the Crimea secede. You're not going to see independence. And here's why. If they were to become independent, these majoritarian Russian populations in Eastern Ukraine and Crimea, everybody would be happy. The Western Ukrainians would be happy, and so would the Easterns, and you wouldn't have conflict anymore. What you're going to see is Russia's going to accept some type of federalization, which means that they're going to be federalized under a Ukrainian nation, but that means that the eastern portions will always be able to complain in the future about being underrepresented and oppressed by the dominant Western government. And eventually they can tweak that with protesters and with ongoing unrest so that in a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 years, when they do want to take back Ukraine, they'll have the justification to do that. So do you see what I'm saying? You're going to have a much better permanent system of conflict by allowing Western Ukraine to go in, ostensibly to go into Western hands, when in fact it is Russian puppets playing as if they're in Western hands.
Joel, so what is the larger, let's spend 10 minutes then go to calls, on the 3 power blocks. Undoubtedly the globalists in their own documents say that is the power blocks. You're very accurate in that research. So what are the power blocks up to? What does this Ukraine thing mean? When will Russia be ready for the strike? Will they strike us with China? But start off with Georgia, because from when I looked at, that was a real attack. What was that about?
Well, that was the West in combination with Israel, because what the West does to have plausible deniability about directly giving military arms to something to exacerbate the Russian and former Soviet state situation. They use Israel. Israel, a lot of Americans don't realize that they use Israel to send a lot of military technology to China, which is going to be our number one enemy someday, even more, greater than Russia. And people would be incensed if they knew that Israel had a green light to transfer technology to China. But they also did it to Abkhazia and South Ossetia. These are the two semi-autonomous regions of Georgia that wanted to defect and become independent. And of course, the West normally does, like to encourage independence. But really, they knew that Russia wasn't going to let that happen, and they did that to simply tweak Russia. Russia did, in fact, have to use military power to come in because of the fact that they had Israeli advisors in there. It looked to them like they were really trying to use military force to break away. This is entirely different than what happened in the Ukraine. Remember, the opposition has no military forces, none whatsoever, maybe only a handful of hunting rifles. There's no way that they could have done a coup, and that's why Russia has no reason to come in and to do a military, invasion to retake Ukraine. So
you're saying just like Arab Spring, the West knows a rebellion's coming, Russia knows it's coming, so they pre-trigger it so they can then control it, discredit it later.
And even worse, the prime minister today is saying he's accusing Russia of trying to invade Ukraine based upon the same phony information that I just told your audience about in Crimea. This is not Russian troops coming in from outside Crimea. These are Russian troops already in Crimea by prior agreement with Ukraine. They're simply shuffling some forces around to make sure that all the military bases are protected. Now, I'm not defending Russia, but they're tweaking the nose of the West, and the new Ukrainian government is tweaking the nose of Russia. But this is all political theater. Nothing is going to happen in a major military way. This is just the onset of continual conflict. And getting back to the bigger picture here, it's my estimation, based upon what I've studied about Russian rearmament and China rearmament, or actual armament. They aren't rearming, but engaged in massive armament, especially of missile forces. They still aren't going to be ready until at least 2020. And even though they're ready, that doesn't mean that there's going to be a strike in 2020. It's going to be sometime in the next decade, not before. Now, as you get closer to the point when they're ready, if they see an opportunity, it's possible that they could strike earlier than that. So I'm not trying to say that there's a definitive time that anyone, we're talking about three different multiple conspiracies here. There's no way anyone can say this is going to happen on a certain date. But we can tell when, by their own statements, they feel like they're going to be ready with their newest weapon systems. And everything out of the Russian system and the Chinese talks about post-2020 in terms of being ready with new aircraft carriers, with new submarines, with their new missile systems. And all the while, of course, the U.S. is disarming. We haven't built a new missile in 20 years, and we're shooting off what Minuteman III missiles we have and not replacing them. It's an incredible suicidal mission of the West to try to set the stage. And what they have to do, remember, they have to induce Russia and China to strike. As strong as they are getting, they still have, especially Russia, has a lot of decrepit systems, a lot of older systems. They got quantity. They don't have a lot of quality except in their newest systems, and they're very low in quantity of those things. But the globalists continue to have to disarm to induce them to strike. And the big picture I want to put out is, and people don't understand, why is it the globalists would want to bring on a nuclear strike onto America? And it's because you can't get Americans to give up essential freedoms, national sovereignty, and yield to a global government unless the U.S. military gets taken down. If they let the U.S. military get taken down in a preemptive nuclear strike, then they can come out of their bunkers, and our leaders are building huge underground bunkers because they know this strike is coming. If they come out of their bunkers and say, oh, the Russians and Chinese deceived us, we didn't know this was going to happen, but our only salvation now is to join together with NATO and other forces and form a new world government to prosecute this war, and literally everyone will lay down and say, save us, do whatever it takes. We don't care about sovereignty, just do what it takes. That's why this is going to happen. But they do have secret weapon systems. I believe they have space-based weapon systems that are going to be used to stop any further strikes while the West regroups and pulls out a lot of secret military weapons that they've been developing, not to defend us with, but to prosecute this war afterwards. I'm projecting that Russia will be defeated eventually in that war because the West will cut a deal with China to betray Russia and turn on its rear, and Russia can't win. And here's the advantage for China in that. He gets to eliminate the other third leg of the conspiracy for the New World Order. And then it's only China versus the West. And then the West wants that. They want a reinvigorated China. They'll use, just like we invigorated Russia during World War II by giving them all that aid and lend-lease, we'll do the same with China. Because the West wanted the Cold War, they wanted this great enemy because it would justify so much more militarization. And the globalists will want an enemy, a Cold War enemy after World War III to justify keeping all of the militarized troops of the world government.
And by the way, these same elites stirred up World War I and World War II, and in so many of their writings, they say they need something bigger than a regional war. Rand Corporation and others have said in the last 3 years, they need a World War III to get the Anglo-American world government in place. So, I mean,
and to keep it militarized, Alex, to keep it militarized, they need a war big enough that they've got an enemy on the other side. You can't win it all. That's why they sabotaged and didn't let us win against Russia. In fact, we let Russia.
Sure, that's why they didn't let Patton go in and beat Stalin or MacArthur, because they wanted to keep him there.
That's right. So we're going to have, after World War III, a powerful world government with a global military and a global taxation system, a new currency. Remember, you can't have a collapse of the dollar and a new currency unless you have a world government to manage it. They're certainly not going to let if the dollar collapsed, they wouldn't let the Fed reconstitute a new currency. And the Fed isn't going to let control of world finance. That's why I keep saying there's not going to be an economic collapse until this war comes. And that gives the powers that be cover. It's not their fault then if the economy collapses, because war did it.
Oh, it's clear. Notice they staged 9/11 right as the .com went under.
Exactly.
I mean, they're always pulling stuff so they don't get the blame. Now, I want to go to phone calls, but let me be more domestic here. The constant attack on men, the constant attack on women in traditional roles, the attack on children, the feminization, all of this, what is the goal behind that? I mean, I've got my views on it. I don't think I've ever asked you your views, Joel Skousen, about the war on men, because it is really kicking into high gear right now.
Well, this goes back to what we've talked about before, that at the bottom, this is a satanic conspiracy. He's giving direction. This is a real person, just like God is real, fighting against God and all that is good. There's no globalist purpose, for emasculating manhood or destroying Western culture and other things other than the fact, or promoting homosexuality for that, unless you want to destroy the moral fiber of a nation. And that's why this multifaceted front that you've so eloquently described is really something that is satanic. And it isn't a uniform conspiracy in the sense that anyone involved is being dictated to. Just like God speaks to conscience, Satan's in there all the time as well. And you have innately liberal people, innately immoral people who get those little hints from conscience to go ahead and attack all that is good and to promote that which is evil and to emasculate masculinity and promote feminism and all of this. And they can do that without conspiracy. That is, of a human variety. Because the grandest conspiracy is the fact that Satan himself works a multifaceted front in people's minds, through organizations, through leadership, that he is allowed to get people into.
Sure, it's a spiritual sickness.
Yes, it is.
But it's so obvious now.
And it's not easy to overcome. Yes, repentance and returning to Jesus Christ is the answer, but we can't force those things. We can only do that by invitation and so that's why the battle is one of dividing society. And that's what I see coming up to this war, is more and more society is going to be divided between those that see that there's a conspiracy, that they control both political parties, those that have a moral foundation. And unfortunately, a lot of Christian churches are being suborned by becoming mainstream and not being and being afraid of being criticized for being extreme and radical. Pastor Chuck Baldwin has some marvelous writings about and criticisms about the mainstream Christian churches and how they're basically getting into the New World Order without.
They're taking government money and literally just spouting whatever the mainstream media says now.
Yeah.
I tell you, what's the time frame, do you think? 5 to 10 years till they try this World War III thing?
As I say, I don't think it's coming before 2020. Now, as you get closer to that, I mean, you can't hold me to that because they could take an opportunity to move forward. But I think we've still got a good 5 years to fight this battle.
And you're saying if we see North Korea start shelling Seoul, get out of major cities.
That's right, because that's going to be the trigger event of World War III. There has to be some reason why they treat North Korea with kid gloves, that they don't ever have a military option for taking them down, or regime change. They know North Korea is going to be the trigger to start it. We may have to use tactical nuclear weapons to stop that kind of attack, and that will justify China and Russia for initiating a nuclear preemptive strike because we started with tactical nuclear weapons.
And they have the PDDs in place where the sub-commanders and silo commanders can't fire back. They'll be totally destroyed.
That's right. You know, our sub and missile commanders believe that they're going to be given the orders to launch on warning when Russia and China launch against us. But I don't believe those orders are ever going to arrive.
And for those that don't know, until the PDDs got changed under Clinton and continued by Bush and Obama, if the missiles are tracking in, they have the authorization to defend. Now they've taken that away.
That's right. And they have told them in PDD 60, 1997, to prepare to retaliate after absorbing a nuclear first strike that don't depend on, they didn't actually tell them you're not going to be able to launch. They just said, don't depend on it. Structure your system so that you can retaliate after absorbing a nuclear first strike. And General Butch Neal of the Marine Corps said, retaliate with what? He was just incensed. And especially since in that same year, Clinton agreed with the Russians that we would keep 50% of our missile submarines in port, either in Kings Bay, Georgia, or Bangor, Washington, to make it easier for the Russians to target them because they were in port. I mean, this is just incredible, Alex.
Yep, and meanwhile, the media pushes 24/7 to demonize the Tea Party. That's the big threat, the Homeland Security says. Let's talk to Michael in Oregon. You want to talk about U.S. flags being banned? You're on the air with Joel Skousen. Go ahead.
Hey, Alex, Joel, it's a privilege, gentlemen. I got to tell you, Joel, what you say, it's overwhelming. I'm sitting here listening. It's overwhelming. I thank you for, the insight that you give us. My son today and I were talking about the USA flags being banned on T-shirts in California. And my son, who's 12, Connor, he said to me, Dad, that's just stupid. Out of the mouth of babes comes wisdom. And I thought I would ask you your take on that. I ordered a bunch of shirts, by the way. I'm going to pass them out, nice Texas shirts and USA shirts. But I think it's crazy. What do you think about it?
Well, California, like New York, is one of those vanguard states of the left, of the globalists who are testing the waters on everything. They're pushing the envelope and just banning patriotism, banning Americanism, banning American culture, just par for the course for the kind of government that you have in California. As a fellow Oregonian, I'll tell you, I wince at the Oregonian newspaper and, the liberal elite in Portland and Eugene. I expect them to follow suit pretty soon, too.
Symbols are powerful, and the globalists have hijacked the symbols of America. They've turned them into their own symbols. Well, we are restoring the idea of the true republic, not the counterfeit globalist empire, by promoting the icon George Washington and others. That's why we're rolling out an 100% made in America line of incredible pro-liberty apparel. We are repopularizing liberty. We are helping fellow Americans rediscover what made this country great. We are the spirit of 1776. We are 1776 worldwide. We are all brothers and sisters in arms in the animating contest of liberty in the long march towards humanity's ultimate destiny of freedom. Visit madein1776.com today and vote with your dollars to promote truly made in America, high-quality products, and promote the ideals of liberty.